like I said before, I started this web series because I was inspired by a lot of people that was questioning what I do or what I have, and the best way to combat any type of hate or any kind of doubt is not to only show and prove.
You lie! You're a fucking liar! Shut up!
Expose. Expose. Ooh. Expose. Yeah. You exposed, bitch. You exposed. If you got no games, you exposed, bitch. You exposed. You exposed. You exposed, bitch. You exposed. 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 Exposed.
See, a real old school gamer never would have even played those games when they were new. No. A real old school gamer cares about old school and experiencing old school for the first time. So they make videos playing games that they never played before when they were new, and that's why they have to play them with cheats turned on. For a true hardcore gamer, it's preferable to play the game digitally so you can turn all the cheats on, since you've never actually played the game before, as opposed to owning original carts with no cheats, where you had to actually learn how to play the game. In fact, that is a class of gamer that goes beyond old school gamer, that goes beyond hardcore, that goes beyond retro for life. No, there's only one word for that type of gamer in the English language. Fraud!
Well, a case that never really should have been opened to begin with has officially been closed. Hip Hop Gamer doesn't have a legit collection of 20,000 games and has been exposed as a fraud. All's well that ends well, right? Except there's one small detail that nobody other than me has even bothered to address. Roll the footage! Now, I also wanted to address 7th Level's theory about how the 20,000 games are all ROMs on a modded Xbox. Personally, I don't buy this either. Yep, everybody seemed to only be concerned with the impossibility of him owning a legit collection of 20,000 games. Yet nobody other than me wants to address the highly unlikely, if not downright impossibility, of Hip Hop Gamer even having a collection of 20,000 ROMs. I even posted a comment on 7th Level's latest video reiterating this, and he responded pretty much agreeing with what I said. But I'll address his response anyway, just to further show that Hip Hop Gamer is in all likelihood lying about even having 20,000 ROMs. Before I do that though, I want to make it perfectly clear that while I have been using and working with emulators and ROMs since roughly 2009 at least, it has strictly been downloading emulators/ROMs to a computer and using them on said computer. As far as console modding to play all these emulators/ROMs is concerned, I know nothing about the technical aspects of actually doing any of that. However, I imagine you basically find all the software online just like you would if you were going to use it on a computer and somehow mod it into the console. But if I'm wrong, I would like somebody in the comments to let me know. Now then, 7th mentioned a whole bunch of potential emulators for old consoles like the Odyssey 2, the Vectrix, Commodore, etc. You have to work a little bit to be able to find them, as they may not be available on your average run-of-the-mill emulator site like CoolROM, Emulator Zone, Emu Paradise, etc. But you'll eventually be able to find them. Getting them to actually work, however, is another story. See, when it comes to emulators, at least from my experience, there's an emulator collection for a certain era of gaming which I have coined the sweet spot, which is basically an era of gaming in which you can just get the emulators and ROMs and barely have to do anything to get them to work. You just get the software and start playing. A lot of these emulators you don't even have to install onto your computer. These emulators are so easy to work with, even somebody like Hip Hop Gamer could do it. The most you might have to do is set your controller inputs, unless you just want to play with the keyboard, in which you can usually just open up and play. These emulators are primarily for the 8 and 16-bit eras of gaming. NES? Plenty of emulators you can download that will work right on the spot. SNES? Only one SNES emulator might require a little teeny bit of preemptive maintenance, and that's ZSNES. The classic Sega consoles? Kega Fusion, aka K-Fusion. Genesis, Master System, Game Gear, and 32X games normally work right out of the gate with that emulator. Only thing you need to do for the Sega CD element to work is download some BIO files. Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and even Game Boy Advance? They work right out of the gate too. The only 16-bit console that is a pain in the ass to emulate is TurboGrafx-16. So much of a pain in the ass that I've yet to find a completely 100% reliable emulator for it. The MAME emulator for arcade games requires a little bit of preemptive maintenance, but nothing too taxing. It's when you get into emulators for consoles that were released before and after this era of gaming that you start running into problems, especially before. You can find all sorts of emulators and ROMs for really old consoles like Atari 2600 and Mattel and Television, but I have yet to find any of them that have worked properly for me. Now maybe I'm doing something wrong on my end, and I know other people have gotten them to work just fine, but for me they are an absolute hassle. So much so that I don't even want to bother with them. And as you will find out when I cover the emulators for the later consoles, I'm at least competent to proficient with working with emulators. So, if I have a hard time with getting emulators from the pre-8-bit era to work properly, how could I possibly believe Hip Hop Gamer, of all people, would be able to get them to run smoothly with no issues? On top of all that, how could I possibly believe that Hip Hop Gamer would even know about some of these old consoles? Sure, he's name-dropped the Atari 2600 before, but am I really expected to believe that Hip Hop Gamer has heard of the Vectrix, or the Odyssey 2, or the Commodore 64, or even the Intellivision 5200 and 7800? With the dumbass corporate pandering dog shit that comes out of his mouth on a regular basis, combined with his pathetic-ass trophy scores on PSN, am I really expected to believe he is enough of a hardcore gamer to know about these old systems that even the average gamer may not have heard of? And like 7th Level even admitted in his own response to my comment, he was even adding a lot of ROMs of imported games as well as potential ROMs for old Apple II computers to be able to reach the hypothetical 20,000 games figure if Hip Hop Gamer were to have ROMs of all the old stuff. I had an Apple II GS as a kid, by the way, just as a little sidetrack. But yeah, even with adding all that, 7th still came up short of the 20,000 games mark. So we can pretty much logically conclude that his supposed 20,000 ROMs, in all likelihood, doesn't include anything from the pre-8-bit generation. But what about after the 16-bit generation? That's where it gets interesting. The success rate of the newer systems is much better than the success rate of the old systems, but the results still vary. I'm already going to eliminate the Sega Saturn from the list right off the bat, as that system is notoriously difficult to emulate. So much so that even the experts of emulation struggle with it. The Dreamcast, on the other hand, is a different story. Now granted, I had to work at it a little bit, trying a few different emulators and playing with their settings, but I found one that I was able to get pretty much any Dreamcast ROM to work flawlessly for. And I have been enjoying the Dreamcast ROMs I have downloaded for it ever since. Other than the mild issue of having to input N64 controls using a PlayStation-style controller, in which I could just probably purchase a USB N64-style controller to remove that hassle anyway, the Project 64 emulator works perfectly. My PSP emulator, called PPSSPP of all things, has been working flawlessly with no hiccups. I haven't messed with the Wii emulation aspects of the Dolphin emulator, but I've had great success with GameCube ROMs. My PCSX2 PS2 emulator experiences some issues every now and then with some ROMs. Like with Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction, for example, it was very laggy and had dramatically misplaced shadows. However, I played around with the emulator settings and got that game to work now with relatively little issues. But then we get to the original PlayStation. Firstly, it's hard enough to find a completely and totally reliable emulator for it that will play everything with no problems. I have not one, but two PS1 emulators in which some of the ROMs work great on one and not the other, so there's already some reliability issues with the emulators themselves. Now what about the ROMs? For those that saw my last video, you may have noticed that when I started listing off obscure games that Hip Hop Gamer would have to know about and have ROM versions for to even come close to reaching his supposed collection of 20,000 ROMs, the very first example I showed was Broken Helix for the original PlayStation. It's actually quite unfortunate that this game is as obscure as it is. It's a 3D action game made by Konami back when they were still good, set in Area 51, that has branching story/gameplay paths, and has a protagonist voiced by Bruce fucking Campbell. Granted, it's not the best game ever, but it definitely deserves to be more well known. But back on topic. The fact that the game is so obscure that it would be unlikely for Hip Hop Gamer to even know about it, to be able to get a ROM version of the game to begin with, is not the only reason why I just so happened to list that game first in my previous video. The footage you're about to see is of me trying to play the game normally, and I end up completing the first major task of the game, which is defusing the first bomb that has been planted inside Area 51. Roll the footage.
The red or blue wire? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I've defused the first bomb.
Good! Get your butt to the next one!
There you go.
Yep, the game just stops dead in its tracks after the cutscene of you defusing that bomb. I have downloaded multiple different ROMs of this game from many different sites and torrent files, have tried this on both my PS1 emulators, even with altering the emulator settings to try to get past this, and have even tried it on different PCs. I get the same exact result every time. There doesn't seem to be a complete 100% working ROM for this game online, and I've looked for one in several places. If there is a working ROM of this game online, it's hidden in a hard-to-find crevice of the ROM/torrent community. So tell me, Hip Hop Gamer, since you've clearly amassed such a large, extensive collection of ROMs, and would therefore have to have this game to reach the 20,000 ROMs figure you've provided, and are therefore clearly better at finding this stuff than I am, I would really like to know how you managed to find a complete 100% fully functional ROM copy of this game. Surely somebody of your hardcore gaming background that has such an extensive knowledge in gaming would know where to find. Oh, wait. You make it clear on a regular basis that you don't know shit about gaming. So how the fuck am I expected to believe that you even know about this game, let alone were able to find a working ROM copy of it? So I guess the better question is, how did the person or people that put together all the ROMs you have in whatever game case or modded console that houses your supposed 20,000 games manage to find a complete working ROM copy of this game? On top of that, how did they even know about this game that went nearly completely ignored during the time period at which it came out, and has thus been relegated into near complete obscurity now? Like I said in my comment posted on 7th Level's previous video, and like I implied in my last video, the only way Hip Hop Gamer would even be able to have a legit collection of 20,000 ROMs was if he were to have emulators for just about every single well-known console that has been able to be emulated thus far, and all the ROMs for each emulator, including all the super obscure games and probably even all the imports as well. As we've already concluded, the likelihood of him even knowing about the super old consoles like the Vectrex and the Odyssey 2 to be able to get emulators and ROMs for, let alone get past all the issues of getting them to work, is slim to nil, so that can't be part of his collection. When you get into the emulators for the newer consoles, you start to get into the area of having non-working ROMs, so that's out the door too. Here are the only scenarios that I can think of that can possibly explain his claim of having 20,000 ROMs. Scenario 1, he had somebody or multiple people that had the knowledge about all this stuff, as well as knowledge of all the past consoles and the games for said consoles, put all this stuff together for him, and told him the number of ROMs he has, without him knowing for a fact that he actually has 20,000 completely working and functioning ROMs. Which in all likelihood he doesn't, because there are some emulators that even the pros would have a hard time to get to work properly, as well as ROMs for several games that are broken. Scenario 2, and this is the most likely scenario if he actually does have 20,000 ROMs, he has your standard emulators and ROMs for the arcade games, 8-bit games, and 16-bit games, then supplements that still huge gap to his 20,000 games figure with ROM hacks of the same game. And for those not in the know, this is an example of a ROM hack. Or the third and final scenario. He's just throwing this figure of 20,000 ROMs out in the open and lying his ass off, thinking nobody that actually has a little bit of knowledge regarding ROMs and emulators will catch on to his bullshit. Well, sorry to say, but that plan sure went up in smoke, didn't it? I mean, damn, even Zaire claiming he owned 5,000 games was more modest and realistic than this shit. Bottom line, this is the situation you now find yourself in, Hip Hop Gamer. You got exposed regarding the implication of having a legit collection of 20,000 games, which I don't even know why people even put in the effort to doubt that to begin with, because the outlandishness of the claim speaks for itself. Regardless, you crashed headfirst into a brick wall of fail on that end. However, now I'm about to pull the wall down and bury you with the tumbling bricks, because I provided some pretty damning evidence in this video showing it's highly unlikely, if not outright impossible, that you even have 20,000 ROMs. The way I see it, you've got one way out of this. I want you, in another one of your live streams, to show us this game case or modded console or whatever you say you have, and show all of us, on camera, all the games you have listed on it, just like 7th Level did with his modded console. I'm going to be generous about this and give you a week to answer my challenge. you failed to prove to Black Bond and the YouTube gaming community that you actually have a legit collection of 20,000 games. Now you need to prove to me and the YouTube gaming community that you're not a fraud on the ROM end of the spectrum as well. If you fail to meet this challenge that I'm issuing out to you, you will forever be labeled as a complete and total fraud, rivaling the levels of even Zaire. And what little reputation you have left will vanish in an instant. Like I said, you've got 1 week. 7 days, Hip Hop Gamer. The countdown has started. It's time to put your money where your corporate cum-encrusted mouth is. We'll be waiting. The Great Exposer has spoken.
Shot fired!